The logo doesn't make the brand. The brand gives the logo its value. And that is probably where I see the strongest evidence for when designers create or design logos and branding. That's what becomes the canvas. And the brand over time and our associations with that business and brand over time, that's what gives it the value. Hey there, my name is Kevin Finn. I am a designer by trade. I live in Brisbane, Australia. Have you ever heard of a designer, a design studio, a branding firm or ad agency say, we build brands? I see this regularly on websites. I see firms say this regularly, and it frustrates me because this isn't what we do as designers. What they're referencing, in fact, is logos, websites, communications assets. Oftentimes when I go to a graphic design website, there'll be a page that says our brands with this heading, our brands, and beneath it is a bunch of logos that they have designed. And this is frustrating for me because we cannot claim the entirety of a brand because we've designed a logo. I'll give you an example. Do you recognize this symbol, this logo? For our American audience, probably more so, it's the Chase Manhattan Bank symbol. But do you know what it means? It's a fascinating backstory, and it was designed by the very influential design firm Chermayeff and Geismar. And this is what Tom Geismar said when he was talking about where the symbol itself came from. So when Chase National Bank merged with the Bank of Manhattan Company to create Chase Manhattan Bank, the new company became the second largest in the United States. The new organization needed a new graphic identity to represent it effectively. Banks at the time generally used trademarks that grew from their initials or an image of the bank's headquarters building. Chase Manhattan briefly used an awkward combination of a map of the United States, a representation of the globe, the name of the bank, and the phrase worldwide banking. They may as well throw in the kitchen sink there, kind of everything pulled into one. So what they decided to do, they became convinced that the bank would benefit from a simple symbol that could not only unite the two newly merged corporate cultures, but also come to stand in for the company's long, unwieldy name in the public mind. However, there's no symbol that really means banking and no symbol that represented Chase, the organization. So they turned to the idea of using an abstract symbol since they knew that Chase Manhattan had tremendous advertising resources that could quickly establish the symbol in the public mind. Now, that's a lot of text, and apologies for that, but it's really worth just seeing from the designer's point of view where the symbol came from and what was going on. Essentially, this symbol meant nothing. This symbol became a canvas for meaning that over time and decades began to absorb all of the associations that we have and as individuals have into this symbol. And that's what became and has become Chase National Bank. The symbol itself, the designers, Tom, they didn't build the brand. They built the canvas. They designed the platform, and everything around the brand came after. Now, I'll give you another example, and this is on the other side of the planet. It's for a company called Canterbury, which is a clothing apparel company. It's based in New Zealand, and in 1904, three English gentlemen moved to the South Island of New Zealand. They set up their business and their life in a region in New Zealand on the South Island called Canterbury, and they loved it so much they decided to call their company after the region, Canterbury. And because they're a clothing company, they call themselves Canterbury Clothing Company, and they started out designing and producing uniforms for the Australian New Zealand military. They progressed over time into sporting apparel. We generally know them for their logos on was on the All Blacks New Zealand rugby powerhouse. And we know Canterbury is very much embedded in the sporting world. Their tagline is committed to the game. They changed from Canterbury Clothing Company to Canterbury, as I said earlier. So all of this is sort of where the business started, where it progressed, and where it is today. But what does the logo mean? It doesn't mean any of the stuff I've just really talked about, other than the fact that there are three founders and there are three circles that overlap in this symbol. They're based in New Zealand, and they use the silhouette of a New Zealand bird called the kiwi, which isn't really a symbol that will be recognized internationally, but it references their locale. And then it's also three C's for clothing, Canterbury Clothing Company. But none of that is really evident when we see this symbol. If we recognize the kiwi sort of silhouette, we go, oh, New Zealand. If we see that there are three C's, we go, well, maybe it's Canterbury Clothing Company. But all of these things, again, The logo itself, the designer did not build all of the associations, all of the meaning and the brand that Canterbury has become into this symbol. So again, I question when I hear designers say, oh, we build brands because they've done logos. We have to remind ourselves that what we are doing as designers is designing canvases for meaning to be applied to it over time from individual associations with an organization, even when that organization changes what it does. I'll give you another example. I'm sure many of us will recognize this, the name of the company's in the actual logo. And Supreme started in 1994 in Brooklyn as a sort of a skateboard shop and was very much in financial trouble. It was broke in the early days, so much so they decided to create or develop some T-shirts and print them and sell them for some extra cash flow. Now, when we think of Supreme today, that's almost laughable that an organization, a business and a brand like Supreme, which is an international powerhouse, at one time needed to produce T-shirts to get some extra cash. Now, for a bit of context, in 2018, the Supreme logo was ranked the most powerful logo in the fashion industry, as that just symbol that we're looking at right now. It was also valued at $1 billion. So we think that, at one point they were struggling for cash. In 2018, worth $1 billion. The next year, 2019, they're worth $2 billion. So again, we look at this and we think that's the sort of story in a snapshot of Supreme. But what does the logo mean? If we look at that logo and we think, well, we understand what Supreme is as a brand and as a business, but where does the logo come from? It doesn't say all of the things we just discussed. And in fact, it came from a bit of an appropriation from an artist called Barbara Kruger, whose work addresses topics of culture, power, identity, consumerism, and sexuality, which of course is perfect for counterculture, skate culture, youth culture, all of the things that we kind of would know from Barbara Kruger's work. But when we look at that logo, they're not really the things that we think of. We think of what Supreme is. We think of all of our associations. We think of what we see in the actions, behaviors, the products, services that it does. So again, we've got to question when a designer or an ad agency or a firm says we build brands, that isn't the case. And there are three examples as to why. Now, there are some exceptions, I have to say. I've thought about this deeply and I've sort of pooled it into these three very key areas where I think that designers can help build brands. And I use that word help. They're not doing it, they're helping. In the first case, if the designer is a long-term strategic partner and they're in a position to influence strategy and planning and product development and processes and systems and all that stuff in an ongoing manner and regularly engaging with the executive and the board and possibly even having equity in the business, they're in a position to help build that brand because they're doing it over a long period of time on a day-to-day basis in an ongoing manner and engaged in a very deep way with that business. Another way is if the designer is the founder or the owner, and that means that they're working in the business on a daily basis anyway, and they're helping to deliver the services, the products and the offers and the experiences to customers, and they're using their design skills to do that or to help do that. But again, it's in a long-term, whole of organization effort. It is not a short-term external engagement. And it's not just doing a logo, working with them for 6 weeks or 6 months and then stepping away and then thinking you've built the brand. It's a long-term effort. The third is when they're working in-house. Now, there was a time, and maybe Chris, you'll recall this, but there was a time when in-house designers were kind of frowned upon, laughed upon. And, if you're an in-house designer, you couldn't really make it as a designer. What happens today is when you're working in-house, you are in a position to contribute and to challenge and to shape the country as it grows and evolves from the inside. And this also happens on a day-to-day basis. The trick there is that it often depends on the designer's seniority. Do they have influence in the business, how it operates? Does the executive or the board value design? And from my research and experience, there are a lot of design-led businesses out there, but not enough. And it often dilutes the designer's input and it excludes them from these critical decisions if a company either isn't design-led or says it is, but doesn't act that way. It's a powerful position for designers, though, to be in-house and be in a position to help build a brand over time. Now, the key point here is the logo doesn't make the brand. The brand gives the logo its value. And that is probably where I see the strongest evidence for When designers create or design logos and branding, that's what becomes the canvas. And the brand over time and our associations with that business and brand over time, that's what gives it the value. Nike is a good example. A swoosh in 1973 meant very little. Today, amazing, huge. Now, there also is a lot of confusion out there. When we talk to various people and about brands and branding and what definitions are, we're going to get lots of different sorts of takes on what's what. I always laugh and think it depends on who we're talking to or who's saying it. It depends on what business we're talking about. Sometimes it depends on what position the sun is in the sky. It's just really kind of random. So I've sort of thought the way that I see all of this over the almost 30 years in the business, how do I define brands and branding? So for me, a brand it's who you are. It's how you're perceived. It's how people feel about your business. It's the core value of your business offer. And it's a promise to your customers of the value they should expect. It's the sum of all the experiences someone has with your business. It's what you live and deliver every day. It cannot be manufactured, created, or invented by an external consultant, because then you'll be required to live up to someone else's vision rather than your own. So that to me is what I feel a brand is. And then there's branding, which is how you articulate and appropriately communicate your business to your customers and to the world across a variety of channels. And this is where designers are useful. There is also another phrase or trend kicking around, and that is about being purpose-driven, which I think is amazing. We should very much have purpose at the heart of what we're doing. But again, depending on who I'm talking to and who's saying it and businesses that I talk to, the idea of what this means is really vague. And when I talk to businesses, when I'm working with them and I say, hey, what is the purpose of your business? They often say to make money, isn't it to grow, to make money? And I go, yeah, fine. But the reality is that making money is a function of business. It's an objective. None of the staff really are going to benefit from all of the revenue you create, the money that you make as a business owner. They're going to get their salary. That's fine. So if making money is your purpose, it generally is just about the executive and the people who are going to benefit from that. But it's an outcome. It's a function. It's not really anything bigger than that. And yet money has become incredibly powerful. It's become powerful because if we think of it this way, as Anne Lappe, who's an influential American author and educator, once said, every time you spend money, you're casting a vote for the type of world you want to live in. That is an amazingly powerful thought. That if we see ourselves as consumers and individuals who are engaging with businesses and brands all over the world, when we spend money, we dictate what kind of world we want the future to look like. That's the reality of it today. Now, there are some critics out there and skeptics who go, well, Kevin, that's wonderful. And let's all hold hands and get on unicorns and head off into utopia over the horizons and the rainbows, because this is, Anne Lappe, amazing, but educator, author, how much power does she really have? And then you see the other side of the spectrum, which if you're familiar with a gentleman called Larry Fink, who's the CEO and chairman of BlackRock, who's the world's largest asset manager with 9.5 trillion in assets under management as of October 2021. His view is that without a sense of purpose, no company, either public or private, can achieve its full potential. It will ultimately lose the license to operate from its key stakeholders. The incredible thing about this is that Larry Fink has been on this sort of soapbox, if you like, but on this mission for over 2 decades. It's not like he's thought, I should say it now because it's popular and it's trendy. He's been saying this for a long time. He's just doubled down on it recently. And he sends out every year letters to CEOs of their portfolio of businesses. He's put them all on notice that if they aren't acting and behaving in a purposeful manner and a way that has purpose at the center, they're going to be rethinking whether they're still in their portfolio. So we've got from Anne Lappe to Larry Fink and everyone in between saying that this is shifting, this is moving. The point is here, my definition of being purpose-driven means putting something incredibly important, something that has a bigger and wider positive impact in the world above and before making a profit. Now, that does not mean that we have to stop thinking about money. That does not mean that money isn't important. We'll come back to this later in the presentation. But what I'm saying here is that traditionally businesses have put money as the metric and the objective. And I'm saying that no longer is that either required or expected, that we need to be putting that to the end of the process, to the where it should sit, the outcome, the objective. And we now to see how does that help us as organizations, as businesses, as brands, as individuals, and as a society move forward in a much more equitable way. So we'll come back to money and purpose shortly. But over as I said, almost 30 years of being in the industry, I started to question myself and say, look, Kevin, if you're looking at brands and branding and businesses and design, is there a framework for what it means to be a brand? What could that be? And I don't mean we look at Nike or Supreme and say, you're a brand. I mean, is there a framework, a mindset, a system that we could think about that would say, whether we're a brand or not, can we think like a brand? Is there a mindset that we could adopt? Or is there a structure that we could look at? And I came up with 15 what I call brand principles. I'm going to share 5 of them with you today. But in order to do that, I'm just going to start with this little exercise. Think of a brand, one that you know very well and that you're very familiar with. You understand what they do, where they sit in the market or whatever product or services, but also one that you are not a customer of. You are never likely to be one. Like, you might even hate them. You might be like, oh God, I know them, but I hate them. I'd never be a customer. Got one? Brand principle 1. A brand is the most valuable real estate in the world, a corner of someone's mind and a relevant place in their life. So here we are in our incredibly busy world with stuff thrown at us every day, visually, audio, the works, ads, offers. And we have given a brand a space in our mind, which we do not like, or we are not a customer and are never likely to be one. The power that they have had to squeeze into our very, very overcrowded minds and allow us to say, we see that business or brand either as a benchmark in the industry or as a reference point, or at least we know them and recognize them when we see them. That is one of the most powerful things. And I should also just shout out here that the first 3/4 of this sentence was not mine. It's from a gentleman called Sir John Hegarty, who's a very influential advertising man from the UK. And he did say that a brand is the most valuable real estate in the world, a corner of someone's mind. I add to that an irrelevant place in their life, because we're going to come back to relevance later. But relevance to me is another vastly, vastly valuable asset that brands can have and should have. Brand principle 3. A brand is internal before it's external. Your staff need to be your greatest ambassadors. The mistake is to think that branding is purely about external branding. Now, I see this all the time when I'm working with businesses or organizations or brands, and they just constantly think that it's external broadcasting, marketing. How do we get out? How do we talk to the customers in the market and all that stuff? The reality is that if everyone inside the business who's tasked to deliver on everything that's been broadcasted externally, if they're not aligned, then it's actually a waste of time, a waste of money. And I laugh at when I think the worst case scenario is that if staff inside a business or a brand start to understand the business or brand they work for purely through external brand broadcasting and marketing, if that's where they're getting their information and go, oh, is that who we are? Oh, because I'm seeing it in advertising, that must be who we are. That's a mess that's just sitting in your business waiting to explode. So we need to understand that brands and branding are internal before they're external. Another big sort of pattern that I've seen is that this view that a brand is a department. It is not. It is the responsibility and representation of your entire organization, from receptionist to CEO. And I'll give you an example. If we see this regularly. Businesses and brands, they talk about brand and they sit it in the marketing department, and that's where brand happens. And that's probably kind of not surprising given the beginning of this presentation, where we talked about designers and advertising agents saying, we'll build your brand for you. Of course, you're going to sit it into the marketing department. So if you do that, and if your brand sits in the marketing department, what does that say about the CEO? And what does that say about every other person in the organization who isn't in the marketing department? This is something that I do get a little bit of pushback on, but I'll explain how it works. So mission, vision, and value statements are great internal guide, but no one outside the organization really cares. They will, however, be interested in the value that these statements deliver. I've had people push back saying, but hey, Kevin, mission, vision, they're all really important. And I say, yes, they are. Internally, staff and the team use these statements to get an understanding of where the business is going, what we stand for, what we're about. But I challenge you, our viewers and our listeners, think about your most favorite brand, the one that you engage with most regularly. Do you know what their mission statement is, what their vision statement is, what their values are, in the statements that they make? Do you care? I wager you don't. But I do feel you will have a sense of what those statements represent through the products and the services and the experience you have. So this is why I say that mission, vision, value statements are really, really important for the inside of a business and a brand, but no one outside needs to know that. If you put it on your website, that's great. It's a public pronouncement of what you stand for. Great. If a customer feels the need to go and look at your website and read it and remember it, great. What that does do, though, is say that if we do want to look and find it, we will hold you accountable because you've stated it. But other than that, we want to see where it shows up. Brand principle 12, a brand is a long-term and evolving objective. It requires dedication and commitment. Building and maintaining your brand cannot be outsourced. It's not a short-term exercise. And I have three sort of examples of that. Chase Manhattan Bank, Canterbury, Supreme. Long-term, over decades, that's how you build a brand, not by doing some logos and some communications and some websites. My view, and Chris, you and I have talked about this a little bit previously, we might talk about it afterwards, but this is my view. I don't think that every business is a brand. And I think, in fact, most of them aren't. And I also think that's okay. So what I'm talking about here and what I see in this space that we're talking about, if we can apply this mindset, then it doesn't matter if we're a brand or a business or vice versa. It matters about the mindset that we're bringing if we're running a business. It also matters if we're a designer, what kind of mindset we bring when we're engaging with these businesses. We don't have to go and say, give us a marketing exercise. In 6 months, we'll build you a brand and we'll move on. That is misleading. I think that's disingenuous. I think it's dangerous in some cases. And I don't think it's fair on the designers or on the business owners. I think we need to go and say, we can bring a brand mindset and we can create tools and assets for you that over time, because it's a canvas for meaning, the associations can be built into it. And that's why I say that designers and consultants are the assist. We don't build it. We assist in how that happens. Now, I've also thought, long and hard about if this is what I feel brands and branding and businesses are, historically and up until now, what's the future looking like? Where are we heading? What are the signals that I'm seeing and the patterns that I'm observing? I actually spent a long time really trying to wade through all of the trends that I'm seeing and all of the things that are happening. And I had to just put them to one side because one word kept coming through that told me where things are going. And that one word was impact. Now, thank you, Kevin. What does that mean? I'll give you an example. And it's an example from a gentleman called Dr. Edward de Bono, who, if you don't know him, he invented the phrase lateral thinking and the tools. And he actually spent 50 years plus creating a body of work that was helping people to use thinking as a skill and how creativity as a skill can be taught and learned. So he's a giant in the space of, I actually call him the forefather of design thinking. But he's got this really, really cool example of a factory on a riverbank. And the factory is bringing in water into its building. And then they do what they're doing, and then they spit out the wastewater and the pollution downstream, and don't really care about who is downstream or the health of the river or the communities that rely on it. And who really cares? We've got what we want. And unfortunately, it's a familiar story, right? people get what they want and they don't care what our impact is. So Edward said, how about we just do this? How about we swap the intake and the outtake? What impact would this have if you took water in downstream, which meant that the water that you push out, the wastewater, the pollution, if you like, has to be clean because you're taking that back in downstream. Now, a really simple idea, beautiful little, conceptual flip, which is phenomenally difficult to do. If you think about the outputs and the inputs and how you clean water and how all that stuff goes on, this little simple idea has a massive, massive impact on the actual organization and the business and how it operates. So people might be looking, saying, "Oh, thanks, Kevin. That's a nice little example, but really, you can't really do that." And yet, the bonus downstream pollution example later became law in some countries. I love this because it is the beauty of an idea that can change in very, very critical ways how we engage with the spaces we are either existing in or engaging in or part of. And the idea that Edward put forward was so simple and so difficult, but made so much sense, that can then become a law. I just love that as an idea. Now, what does that all mean? That all sounds lovely again, Kevin. That's great. Well, for me, purpose is motivational. Impact is measurable. So without purpose, impact is kind of scattershot. It could either be purely utilitarian, functional, practical, just numbers, but no real direction. But purpose without impact, it runs the risk of becoming a bunch of lovely words on a poster that sit in the staff kitchen or the boardroom and everyone goes, great, that's as far as it goes. We have to see how that purpose gets measured. So these two together, for me, is where we are moving into the future. And there's lots of examples that we're very familiar with, like the Patagonias of the world, that we can immediately go, oh yes, this is what's happening. But there aren't that many, Kevin. So what are you talking about? Well, the research that I've been doing is really, really, really incredible. What's happening in the world? If we look back to 2015, there was a study of millennials where 91 of them said they would switch brands to one associated with a cause and more likely to purchase a product with a social or environmental benefit and volunteer for a cause supported by a company they trust. 91%. Now, we can all laugh at millennials. A lot of people do. They bash them and it's like, oh. But these people, these millennials, they are working in companies. Some of them are setting up their own companies. And many of them already are or very soon will become leaders in companies. And if this is what they're thinking and this is what's important to them, this is what the future is going to look like. Because they are the ones who are going to be in power. Some already are, but this is coming. Another study, which was reported in the Harvard Business Review in 2018, the researchers said that 9 out of 10 people that they spoke to were willing to trade a percentage of their lifetime earnings for greater meaning at work. And this is across age and salary groups. Workers want meaningful work badly enough that they're willing to pay for it. Now, what does that mean? Pay for it? How did they do that? So the researchers literally asked them, if you put a value on meaningful work, what would that be? The researchers were surprised to hear that of all the people they spoke to, they wanted to, or they were willing to forfeit 20% of future salary for meaningful work. What does that mean in terms of tangibles? In America, 21% of an individual's income goes to accommodation or rent or mortgage. And these people are willing to, forfeit 20% for meaningful work. It led the researchers to feel that a definition of the 21st century kind of needed an update. And they said it now is food, clothing, shelter, and meaningful work. This is, not only is this coming, this is here, and this is here to stay. So how does this now show up in, that's lovely, Kevin, research and speak to people, great. How is this now impacting? With these trends and these signals and these patterns of people shifting, of all of us shifting our priorities, how are the businesses and brands responding? Lego is trying to refashion the product it's best known for. It wants to eliminate its dependence on petroleum-based plastics and build its toys entirely from plant-based or recycled materials by 2030. Now, they want to do that without impacting the color of the bricks, the durability of the bricks, or the smooth click of the bricks. And they're also doing it just quietly. They're not up there going, hey, we're wonderful, we're doing this, you should love us, because they're doing it because they see the amount of plastic they produce is at a gargantuan level, and the impact that does have reminds me of the factory that Edward Bono said on the riverbank. We need to change because the impact downstream is having such a bad effect, and it's on us. And they're stepping up to do it. Another one, McDonald's. According to them, their new purpose will mean more support for farming communities and aim to source 100% of packaging from renewable, recycled, or certified sources by 2025, donating millions of pounds in weight of food from the supply chain and restaurants to people in need, and reducing barriers to employment for more than 2 million people worldwide. If you think of the reach and the scale McDonald's has, and that's now their mentality, it is a phenomenal impact. Huge. Now, I also recognize that there's a lot of us who might kind of look at McDonald's skeptically and say, yeah, but you're McDonald's, you could do better. And yes, all these organizations could do better. For sure, we all could. But the fact that they're doing this, the fact that they're starting, and the fact that their impact is going to be hugely scalable, we should be there saying, we recognize, we acknowledge, we support what you're doing. And yes, you could do better. We want to encourage you to do better, but we must first applaud that you're doing these things first, that this is the step towards where you're heading. Now, I also think, maybe they're doing this because it's the right thing to do. Or maybe if we look at the statistics and the research, they're doing it for business survival, because if they don't do it, customers will go somewhere else. So they're either doing one or the other, the right thing to do or business survival. Doesn't matter, they're doing it. In the UK, Aldi's CEO Giles Hurley sent a letter to suppliers informing them about the supermarket chain's pledge for own brand packaging to be 100% recyclable, reusable, or compostable by this year, 2022, and warning them that all other products will need to meet this standard by 2025. Significantly, Hurley was blunt about the fact Aldi's request was non-negotiable, and that the future decisions would be based on our supply partners' ability to lead and adapt in this area. This is like uncompromising. You do it or you're out. It's black and white. And this is Aldi, massive supermarket chain. There's a small startup in Australia, in Melbourne. So we're talking about the Aldis and we're talking about the McDonald's and the Legos, but then there's startups. And this is called Great Wrap. And it's a plastic-free, plant-based alternative to kitchen brands like Glad Wrap, and they've designed their product in such a way that their impact is already built in. Once used, the wrap can go straight into your home compost system or green waste bin, where it breaks down quicker than orange peel. So again, the businesses that are coming up, that the starting, are building impact into what they do from the get-go. This is also reaching into the highest financial systems in the world. For example, in late 2020, the European Central Bank said that it will start conducting in-depth assessments of how bank balance sheets account for climate risks in 2022. Banking, all about money. But they're like, well, okay, we've got responsibilities too. And so do businesses and brands. Investors, this is again from the Harvard Business Review, there's a feeling that firms with greater negative impact generate less investor interest, which reduces their stock market valuation and raises their cost of capital. So we are now looking at incredible, tangible impact into how businesses and brands are operating from a financial point of view, if they're not thinking about impact, if they're not thinking about how they are engaging with the world that we all are part of. In Europe, 9 of the biggest investors wrote a letter that included, it would not be consistent to emphasize climate risks in the strategic report, but not consider these same risks in the accounts. The letter said, if accounts leave out material climate risks, too much capital will go towards activities that put shareholder capital at risk, where still this puts all our futures at risk, from investors to banking, right through to countries. So this year, 2022, in June to August, Germany made unlimited travel on trains just €9 per month. And that saved 1.8 million tons of CO2 emissions. And that's equivalent to 350,000 homes, what they produce in a year of CO2 emissions, which is incredible. And it also dropped air pollution by 7%. But they didn't do that necessarily for climate. They did that because the program was devised to reduce the impact of inflation on German citizens. So they came at this and thought, how do we reduce the impact of inflation? We could do this because it helps cost of living. It helps a whole range of other things. And when we talk about impact, we're not talking about one thing. We're talking about what is the ripple of that one thing doing elsewhere. And this is a great example. So the ripple of approaching a problem about cost of living and inflation also tackles an incredible environmental issue. The program was also funded by a windfall tax on energy that amounted to 231 million. Once again, impact. These energy companies are having some of them having a negative impact on the world. They're getting taxed on it. I look at it almost like an impact tax. And that tax that the organizations, that the companies, the governments are getting, they're putting it into these impact solutions. It was so successful that Spain decided they'd follow suit, but they'd do it for free, not €9 a month. All of this tells me that impact is where not only the future of businesses and brands are, it's where all of our connected future is heading towards. We need to be thinking about this. And how do we then go to organizations and brands and businesses and say, hey, we've got to talk about impact. We've got to all hold hands. No, we got to go and talk to them with incentivized conversations that motivates them to see the upside of taking an impact mindset. And I look at it this way. Impact equals relevance equals revenue. Now you could swap out revenue for return, because return could be reputation, could be measurement, could be reach, whatever. But revenue is a metric for business. And as we said before, when we ask an organization what's their purpose, they say to make money. Well, the incentivizer there is to make money. Let's put it at the end where it should be. If you have impact and a positive impact, you become relevant in the world that you are part of, and then people decide to transact with you. And that gives you your revenue or your return. And then that just goes round. The more impact you make, the more relevant you are, the more revenue you generate. That revenue goes back into impact, which increases your relevance, which increases your transactions, which increases your, so around it goes. That to me is an incredibly simple incentivized model where we can go and talk to businesses, brands, organizations, and say, here is a reason why you can put impact at the heart of why you should put impact at the heart of what you do. Because either one, it's the right thing to do, or two, it's going to be business survival, because not only is this coming, it is here. The problem sometimes is companies go, let's do that and let's go talk about it. Let's go tell the world that we're doing great and this is what we do. And go, okay, fine. And as designers, we're all engaged to craft beautifully written copy and talk about business in the best terms possible. And this is the reality. No one cares about your well-crafted story. What they do care about is where your story shows up in their story. And that's about relevance. And we need to flip out when we're talking to organizations, and as designers and copywriters and creatives, we need to be able to show why these companies and these brands are relevant to the people who are within their audience or the community. And we can only do that if we show that community where this organization or this brand shows up in that community story. My belief is that ROI in the 21st century will evolve to become return on impact. And I don't think it's an unreasonable belief. I think that if we see where the signals are going, if we see where society is shifting towards, and if we can move the needle away from revenue as the starting point and push it to the outcome where it should be, impact can drive in a way that is going to absolutely reshape our world. And it's happening, but I think that to me is sort of where I feel that things are moving. Now, I will finish up on a little personal story. It's personal, but it gave me some incredible life lessons. In 2013, we lost my mum to cancer. She had a 4-year battle with cancer. She was 64, and she had plans for the future. She didn't know she was going to pass away age 64. And yet I was there when she had her last breath and in her last moments. And I thought to myself, none of us know how much time we have. So we need to be very, very clear and deliberate about what it is we do with our time. We just want to make sure we do it consciously. And it really got me thinking about that, which unfortunately was reinforced a few years later when we lost my dad to cancer. He was 70 and he had plans for the future. And I realized that me as an individual, as a creative, as a designer, as a person in the world, I need to really decide what it is I want to do. And I came to the conclusion that we don't have time to fuck around because we don't know how much time we have. Now, I mean that if any of us out here listening to this or watching this have an idea that we want to do that we've been too scared to pursue or haven't had the courage or we're doubting ourselves, just do it. What's stopping you? If we're a business and we're thinking that we just want to sell widgets or grow our money or, grow our revenue, to what end? I mean, what are you doing in the world? What is the meaning to that other than more and more? When does it stop? Again, we don't have time to fuck around because the future relies on our decisions. So this to me has become a bit of a mantra, a bit of a guiding thought for myself. And I put it on myself to say, what do I want to do? And I made a very conscious decision with my work only to work with meaningful organizations doing meaningful things and work with good people. And I turned down work because I didn't fit with them or didn't they fit with me because of these few words. So much so I thought I needed to phrase something a bit more positive and say, what is it that I want to do? This is my driver, not having this time, but what do I want to do? And I thought, what I want to do is have a positive impact at scale. That to me is underpinning everything I do. And those few words on screen are my reminder as to why I'm doing that. And so much so that I pulled everything into a book. And I know, I even said this to myself, that sounds a bit arrogant and a bit presumptuous that, hey, I should write a book because I know stuff. But I wrote a book because I've been talking about this stuff for over a decade, maybe 15 years. It's been just me in a room with an audience or with a group of people or with a business. And if I think that I want to have a positive impact at scale, I needed a medium that could scale. And a book to me was one way to do it. It also meant that I could go into these principles and this research and how my observations have led me to where I am in way more detail. So I thought, for better or worse, I will write a book and I'll see where that goes. If I leave you with this thought, every day we are designing our future, no matter who we are, but particularly in the design field. And history is watching. So we need to be thinking about our impact. We need to be thinking about what kind of meaning we're bringing into the world. If not for us, for the next generations. It's so important.